Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Carrick House, Selwyn Place, Holly Cottage, and Gwynn Place. Short Steampunk Adventures by Shelley Adina. Narrated by Fiona Hardingham. Carrick House. Chapter 1. A Pigeon Arrives. August 1895. London.
Lady, a pigeon's come from the Canadas. It's from Willie's mum.
In the drawing-room at 23 Wilton Crescent, Lady Claire Trevelyan, Malvern, took the letter from her 8-year-old ward Lucy, recognising the decisive hand of Davina Countess Dunsmuir. The envelope was slightly damp, probably because of its journey from Southampton inside the pigeon's brass-carrying cavity. "Thank you, darling." One was supposed to use the tube system of the Royal Mail once the intercontinental transport airships, on which the pigeons piggybacked for long distances, moored on English soil. But her household had most illegally rigged a communications cage at the top of Carrick House for her private correspondence, it being of the sort that ought not to be perused by phlegmatic postal inspectors. In 6 years they had not been found out. She settled into her favourite corner of the sofa and began to read, a glass of fine tawny port on the table at her elbow. Lucy and their other wards, all former street sparrows, lay on the rug or curled up on the sofa with her, the older ones reading, the younger ones playing with a tin airship whose propellers really spun. Her husband, Andrew, relaxed in the wing chair, proofing a monograph that was to be published in a few months' time, his pencil stuck behind one ear. Claire still marvelled at the changes wrought in her life since she was 17. Everything had begun that night 6 years ago, when the Arabian bubble had burst. The subsequent financial crisis had proved once and for all that the combustion engine could not compete with steam. It had also proved that her father, Viscount St. Ives, had been the next thing to a confidence man and had helped to defraud thousands of investors. The ensuing riots had driven her from this very house in Belgravia. She had departed in fear, forced to live on the streets, and each time she'd come back, she'd been a different woman. A street sparrow, an adventurer, a student, then a surrogate parent. A member of the Royal Society of Engineers, and, as of 8 months ago, Andrew's wife. Through it all, in her heart, she remained what the children had called her first, the Lady of Devices. She'd faced many a challenge in those days, but this evening, by the time she reached the middle of Davina's letter, it was clear that a challenge of a different kind was about to call upon her resources. She glanced up from the page to Lewis Prothero. The young man was standing upon the hearth, one shoulder against the mantel. With his fingers loose around the short stem of his empty glass, he waved it as he argued some point of business with Snouts. No matter how serious that business might be, poor Lewis would be utterly unprepared for this news. Oh dear. In the spring, all of society had witnessed his gentle, diffident pursuit of the lovely Emma Makepeace, who had arrived from the 15 colonies and become the toast of London's ballrooms. And now we are told Miss Makepeace is dead, that lovely girl who brought such delight to us all. I have it from Alice and Ian Hollies that a young lady of Maggie's acquaintance is helping to discover the villain who has killed her. Do you know the Miss Lindens? They are brave indeed to take on the solution of this tragedy. I have written to the elder, Daisy, to tell her what I know of Miss Makepeace and her appalling father, but I thought you should know of her passing as well, since she was known to you and Lewis. Be as gentle as you can when you tell him. One never knows with matters of the heart, but I suspect his intentions were honourable and true. I have rather a soft spot for the young man. I will never forget his and 3rd Engineer to Williger's kindness to my will in those dark days when I believed my boy to be dead. Claire's acquaintance with Miss Makepeace had not been a deep one. On the rare occasions she and Andrew had attended a ball this past spring, they might smile and converse, exchanging brief pleasantries as people do when they cannot hear themselves over the racket. But now, as she watched Lewis, her throat tightened, her heart might ache for him, but his would take the worst of the blow. Smiling at something Snouts had said, he glanced at Claire as if to include her in the joke. Their gazes locked. "Lady? What is it?" The base of his glass clacked on the oak mantel. He crossed the carpet to her, kneeling to look up into her face. "Is there bad news? Has something happened to Lady Dunsmuir? To our Willie?" Andrew had lowered his proofs, and she could feel his alarm from here. She must not falter, or show any less courage than she would expect of Lewis if their situation were reversed. "The Dunsmuirs are all well," she said for her husband's sake. "But, Lewis, Davina has news that concerns you." "Me?" In his surprise he stood. It seemed to Claire that once on his feet, he braced himself. "What can she possibly say of me?" "You must be brave, dear." She handed him the letter, her heart squeezing with sympathy. There was nothing she could do but what she had always done, given the ones who trusted her the unvarnished truth, and then a shoulder to support and comfort them afterward. She met Andrew's gaze, and between them there flashed an entire conversation, the gist of which was, "I will handle this, dearest. Some things require a woman's touch." Lewis's gaze flashed down the page, stalled, began again. Then, as though thrusting away the awful truth, he flung out an arm, tossing the letter on the mantel. His wrist hit the empty glass. It crashed to the tile hearth, shattering glittering bits of crystal everywhere. Lewis, always so careful to be a good example around the smaller children, choked out a curse and knelt to sweep up the shards with his bare hands. "Lewis, no!" Claire's skirts got in the way in her hurry to reach him, but it was already too late. "Take my handkerchief. Your hand is bleeding." "Clumsy. Such a fool." Could a heart hold such pain and still beat? Her eyes filled with hot tears. She touched Lewis's shoulder. "Come along. We must put some iodine on that cut." "It's nothing." She must get him through this somehow, and it could not be in front of the entire household. The only thing that came to mind was trite and useless. She said it anyway. "But it may become something, according to Dr. Pasteur's theories of infection. Please." Lewis was no longer a child, too frightened and awed to disobey her. He was a man of 21, a brilliant financier, the secret proprietor of the Gaius Club, for whose rare memberships the sons of the richest bloods fought. And yet all she saw was the boy who had stood up to bullies and miscreants for her sake, and had become the first of the South Bank gang won to her side. She would stand up for him now. He must have seen the love and determination in her eyes, for he allowed her to lead him out of the room. In the spacious, comfortable office that she shared with him and Andrew, she lost no time in dabbing iodine on the cut. She could hear the faint tinkle of someone sweeping up the glass on the hearth. Maggie, probably, who never waited to be asked when help was called for. After Claire had covered the wound with a sticking plaster, she did not let go of his hand. "I knew you cared for Miss Makepeace, but I did not know how deeply." A flicker of pain crossed his thin, sensitive face as he extricated his hand from both of hers. He turned his head away. "There is no keeping a secret from you, is there?" His voice held the ache she still felt in her own throat. "We used to think you had listening devices attached to all the walls. Perhaps you still do, only they are better concealed." "The only one I have is in my heart," she said softly. "It does not take a listening device to see a man's pain when the woman he cared for meets such a terrible end." Lewis's face crumpled despite his obvious attempts to be strong and manly. Well, as the children would say, nuts to that. She took him in her arms, though he was now a head taller than she. His forehead fell to her shoulder, and his body shook as he wept. At length he mastered himself, and she pulled a handkerchief from her sleeve, handing it to him in silence. He blew his nose. You will think me a fool, grieving a woman I barely knew, with whom I knew I had no chance.
You are the last person I would ever think a fool, and she was the kind of woman who would be honoured by your feelings for her.
No, Lewis had not been the only suitor to have been enchanted by Miss Makepeace's masses of golden hair and delightful laugh, nor had he been the only one she had not permitted to call. However, as far as Claire knew, he had been the only one to be boldly ejected from the premises by her irate father. She felt a chill at the thought of what he had told her about the roses, the bouquet of Persian roses he had cadged from the conservatory at Hatley House, the roses whose innocent heads had been cut off and strewn about the lawn. A few dances, a conversation in a moonlit conservatory, a chance meeting in a bookshop. How can I feel this way with so little encouragement?
As Snouts might say, it's not the quantity, it's the quality, and along with the loss of the woman, you face the loss of the life you might have built together.
He nodded, his lashes still wet. Perhaps that is the worst of it. I tell you, lady, if caring for someone hurts like this, I may just avoid it in future.
One is tempted, but I can say from experience that when the partner of your heart comes along, trying not to care is the least effective thing you can do.
I don't see that happening.
The heart heals at its own pace. It may not seem so now, but in time the smallest, silliest things may bring you comfort. Orange chiffon cake, for instance, was very helpful in my case.
A smile flickered to life, almost convincing. The chickens, perhaps, might be in mine.
Always.
A moment passed before she found the courage to say,
"That reminds me. I hear there is a hen and 1 or 2 chicks living rough in Hyde Park."
His head came up. Clearly he was desperate enough for distraction to allow this silliness to serve. "Not near Rotten Row, I hope. They will be trampled, with all those ridiculous blood horses galloping up and down."
"No, nearer the Longwater. I was thinking of an excursion tomorrow, in hopes of finding them. My informants this afternoon were most insistent."
"Young Sophie and Chad, I suppose."
This was less a guess than simple deduction. These street sparrows were not members of the household, for she and Andrew had long ago run out of bedrooms. But they came to the back door now and again to bring her gossip and messages and news of a world that the lady had once ruled. A world in which Mrs. Malvern, R.S.E., no longer found it quite so easy to move.
"Will you join the party?"
Lewis nodded, his shoulders straightening.
"I think Mr. Thistlethwaite can manage without me for an hour."
"Your majordomo could manage an entire army blindfolded, and you know it."
"That is why I hired him," Lewis said, with a grain of satisfaction. "There is nothing like a retired sergeant-at-arms to whip some of the more spirited bloods into submission, especially if they're suspected of cheating at cards. If there is anything he hates, it is a cheater."
The prospect of rescuing birds and whipping blood heirs into a semblance of manners had cheered Lewis, or at least he was allowing her to think so. Claire could only hope that the small joys of life could help him through the valley of the shadow. Together they returned to the drawing-room. Andrew drew her to his side, sensing in that way he had that she needed him. As she leaned upon his strong shoulder, she realized that she must never lose sight of those unobtrusive joys, for of such humble bricks was the house of happiness made. The following morning, at an hour so early the fashionable would not yet have had their breakfasts, Claire, Lewis, and the young ones located the hen and her chicks by following the sound of shouts and cheers. Several boys were amusing themselves by tossing in her chicks, and then forcing the frantic hen into the water after them. With a roar, Lewis and Chad waded into the fray, laying into the miscreants with walking-stick and fists, and sending them bruised and running for their lives across the green. Tenderly, Claire laid the shivering, terrified mother and her brood in a basket lined with cotton tea-towels. Sophie scouted the shore, her mop of tight black curls practically standing on end with rage. "I'm sure we saw 4 of the poor chicks, lady," she called. "I'll have a look about." Sure enough, the fourth chick had taken refuge in a bank of sedge and was rescued in a storm of peeps and flapping. But once in the basket, it settled quickly under its mother's breast, burrowing deep into her feathers despite its wet welcome. "Well spotted, Sophie," Claire said on a breath of relief. "You have saved 5 lives today, you and Chad. I am proud of you." "I'm glad we got here in time." Lewis put a hand on Chad's thin shoulder. Startled, the boy looked up from the basket in surprise, his dark brown eyes widening even as his mahogany cheeks suffused with colour at the unexpected gesture of affection.
"Me too, sir," he whispered. "No one deserves to be treated so, not even a dumb animal."
"You'll find chickens much more intelligent than that lot." Lewis jerked his chin in the direction the fleeing youths had gone. "Perhaps after we get them settled in the garden at Carrick House, and Granny Prothero has found you both a bite to eat, you and I might have a word."
"Me, sir?"
Chad's gaze became apprehensive.
"What about?"
"It seems I may have an opening at the Gaius Club. I think you would do admirably." The boy's jaw dropped. Before he snapped it closed,
"Can't, sir. Not all the way over in Mayfair. What would my sister do without me? Or Patch's ear?"
She elbowed him and hissed.
"Are you mad? Take the job and never mind. I'll manage, same as always."
Claire picked up the basket and indicated they might begin the walk home, though every instinct urged her to leap in and offer suggestions and help. The club was Lewis's domain, and while he asked her and Andrew for advice now and again, he'd proven his own astonishing abilities so often that she suspected he did it merely so that they would feel welcome and included in his affairs. "No females are allowed in any of the gentlemen's clubs, I'm afraid, not even as staff," Lewis said as they passed Hyde Park Corner. Even this early, someone was on the soapbox, ranting about the evils of undersea dirigibles. "But let us talk it over after breakfast, shall we? No business decision was ever well made on an empty stomach."
"Claire!"
called a voice behind them, and a young woman reined in a chestnut horse in a clatter of hooves.
"Claire Malvern, is it you? Is it not?"
With the handle of the basket in both hands, Claire turned in surprise. Good heavens! Peony Churchill! The young lady slid from her side saddle and hitched up her brown velvet riding habit in one gloved hand. Her veiled top hat sat at a jaunty angle on the rich braided bundle of her hair, and her cheeks were flushed with exercise and pleasure. Claire barely had time to hand the basket to Sophie before she was gathered into Peony's lavender-scented embrace and kissed on both cheeks, French fashion.
"I hardly recognised you without a lightning rifle in the rear view," Peony said. "My goodness, how happy you look. Marriage suits you, does it?"
"It does," Claire said, still feeling slightly winded from surprise. "I never know if my letters are going to find you. I thought you were in Paris."
"That was ages ago, before I trekked out to the wilds of Cornwall for your wedding. I have been mainly in the 15 colonies and the Canadas."
Peony's lashes fluttered up.
"Do introduce me to your friends."
Claire slipped an arm through hers. "Peony Churchill, may I introduce Lewis Prothero, my private secretary, and our young friends, Chad and Sophie Morton." Peony held out her hand and shook Lewis's, then Sophie's, then Chad's, effortlessly observing the rules of precedence as if she had not noticed the torn jacket, the dirty faces, or the ragged hems. Chad and Sophie accepted food at Carrick House, but their fierce pride would not allow them to take more. They made the rounds of the church charities for their clothing and caught odd jobs where they could. Pickpocketing and games of chance would ensure the permanent closure of the back door, so as far as Claire knew, they had given them up. Claire hoped that Lewis's kind offer would be the making of the boy, and she would need to find a solution for Sophie. They were compassionate, independent, and strong, exactly the sort who would do well if only they had a chance at making their living.
"Mr. Prothero, I don't believe we met in the Canadas, did we?"
Peony leaned over to look in the basket, then drew back as though it contained a snake.
"That is a chicken, a live chicken." "It is, miss. We have just rescued her,"
Sophie told her.
"My goodness, Claire, in some respects you have not changed at all. In others,
She tilted her head toward Claire's hand, with its trio of pearls set in gold on the fourth finger. "You did not meet me on the voyage to the Canadas, no," Lewis said in reply, finally getting a word in edgewise. "Lady Claire asked me to come, but I preferred to look after her affairs here. As it turned out, that was the right decision."
"Look after her affairs?"
Peony repeated. She eyed him as though he had become very interesting indeed.
"You must be much older than you look to have that kind of responsibility. That was nearly 6 years ago."
Lewis is a most resourceful young man. Claire was unable to keep the quiet pride from her tone. "I think he must have been born with the ability to do arithmetic, and he never forgets a detail of business, especially when it comes to the stock market."
"Really?"
The horse walked along on its rein behind its mistress, as though it might be quite used to this kind of interruption to its exercise.
"Well then, Mr. Prothero, if you ever tire of your present employment, perhaps I could convince you to advise me. I could certainly use it."
"That is a leading statement, if I ever heard one," Claire said with a smile. "Peony, you must come to dinner. This evening, if you are not otherwise engaged. I want to catch up on every detail that you have so coyly left out of your letters."
"That would take much longer than one evening,"
Peony said in a sober tone that made Claire gaze at her in surprise. Then she brightened.
"But I would love to come."
8 o'clock?
"Perfect. Are you still at Carrick House?"
"Oh, yes. I own it now, if you remember. I'll send you round a card, shall I?"
"Oh, goodness, let's not stand upon ceremony. I'll simply see you this evening."
Swiftly she reeled in the horse, and Lewis offered his cupped hands as a mounting block. In a moment she was back in the saddle, smiling and supremely confident.
"Good morning to you all."
Lewis and Chad watched in admiration as she nudged the chestnut to a canter. "Quite a looker, innit?" the latter said to no one in particular. Lewis cleared his throat. "That is Miss Churchill to you. She is the lady's friend."
"She can still be a looker. The lady is."
"Don't be impertinent." Lewis took the basket from Sophie, and they walked on in the direction of Wilton Crescent. Claire smothered a smile. "Chad, have you ever heard of Miss Churchill's mother? Isabel."
"Weren't she a spy?"
"She was not," Claire said with firmness. "She was working on behalf of the Nanook and other peoples in the Canadas, negotiating with Her Majesty's representatives to see that their rights and resources were not abused. As it happened, so was Lady Hollies's father, Mr. Chalmers."
"Lady Hollies has a father?"
Sophie said in some surprise.
"We ain't never seen him."
"Everybody's got a father, you numpty." Chad elbowed her in the ribs. She elbowed him back.
"We don't. Not ever."
"In the beginning you must have," Lewis said. "Just like me. Granny Prothero's son was my father, though I don't remember him or my mother. Granny brought me up."
"We brought up our own selves," Sophie said proudly. "Once we ran away from the workhouse, that is."
The two of them ran on ahead, probably to break the news of their success in the rescue at the house. Claire and Lewis followed more slowly with the basket. The hen was looking less terrified and more resigned to her unexpected mode of travel, as long as it didn't involve water. "Lewis, it just occurred to me that Miss Churchill was riding a horse," Claire said suddenly. "I did notice a rather large beast in the vicinity," he replied with such gravity she was quite sure he used the same tone on inebriated bloods at the club. "She is a fine rider." "But, Lewis, she is a wit, or was the last I saw her. Only bloods are stuffy enough to ride horses in the Row in this day and age. The rest of us drive landaus, and high flyers, and penny farthings, that sort of thing." "Perhaps she has changed, lady." "Perhaps." Claire fell silent, and how uncharacteristic was it that Peony had not wanted her card. Perhaps it wasn't the card at all. Perhaps she simply hadn't wanted to say where she was staying. How very odd. Chapter 2. Lady Jermyn, Sir Richard, Nicholas, and Peony arrive. While Lewis took Sophie and Chad into the garden to introduce the hen and her chicks to the other members of the flock, Claire went down to the kitchen to tell Granny Prothero there would be one more for dinner.
"Oh, m'lady, if you could see your way to finding me some help, that news would be a lot more welcome. I don't know what possessed us to let go of Charlie, I really don't.
He was offered a position on Swan, Granny, Claire reminded her. Sir Ian and Lady Hollies are very pleased with his work, and he has a chance to rise in the ranks of the fleet. You trained him well. The elderly woman sighed.
That's the way of it, innit? You train 'em up proper, and someone else snaps 'em up sure as can be. Our Alice'll lose him too, just you wait.
Not, I hope, for some time. Claire regarded the chaos of the breakfast dishes, which little Lucy was attempting to address, even though the frying pan was nearly as big as she was. Granny, I may have a possibility for you. Lewis wishes to hire young Chad Morton at the club. What do you think of his sister as your assistant here? Granny scrubbed the big table with salt.
I think she'd make off with the silver, soon as look at it.
We have an agreement that thievery of all kinds will be suspended if a sparrow takes a meal here.
And you trust them too?
I do. Lucy looked over her shoulder from her step-stool in front of the sink.
Sophie's all right, m'lady. She ain't broke her promise, and she even asked could she join us at our lessons. Maybe.
Did she? That sounds promising. Claire had lost one or two to the streets once they realised the price of food and safety was knowledge. Everyone began with arithmetic, spelling, mechanics, and basic housekeeping, no matter how old they were. After that came logic, chemistry, and history, and employment. There, Granny, with your permission, I shall ask her. She and Chad are in the garden with the new hen and her babies.
It's your kitchen, m'lady, Granny said, the way she always did.
No, Granny, it is yours, Claire replied, the way she knew she must.
I'll have a word with her then, but don't be surprised if she does a runner.
Thank you, Granny. Claire took herself upstairs to the office, where Andrew applauded her idea. Then she told him how they had met with Peony. I shall be glad to see her, he said, tilting back in his leather chair. She doesn't stand on ceremony, does she? Admitting one has no engagements for the evening and accepting an invitation so promptly. No pride there. Merely the privilege of friendship. A whoosh and a thump announced the arrival of a tube downstairs, and in a moment there was a knock on the open door. 18-year-old Maggie Polgarth, to whom Claire was as close as an elder sister, leaned in.
Lady, you have a letter from Lady Jermyn.
Will she ever hear her mother's name without this sinking of the stomach and this mental bracing for a gale? The former Lady St. Ives could comment upon the weather and still find a way to make Claire feel guilty about it. Now the wife of Sir Richard Jermyn, who had owned the estate bordering Gwynn Place all of Claire's life, her mother had found joy in her second marriage, and in the management of both properties. She held Gwynn Place in trust for 7-year-old Nicholas, Viscount St. Ives, Claire's little brother. Security had mellowed her a little, but not so much where her only daughter was concerned. Thank you, Maggie. Anything from Lizzie?
No,
her ward said, frowning.
I can't think what is keeping her in Penzance. It is not as though Tig is posted to St. Michael's Mount. He is still in the Canadas with the Dunsmuirs.
Perhaps she is enjoying her week with your grandparents. Maggie had been down to Cornwall the week before that with her cousin. Now her brows rose, delicate as the feelers of a butterfly.
Perhaps Hades has frozen over, and she is enjoying the skating.
Maggie! Came from behind Andrew's engineering drawings, in the tone one employs when one is trying not to laugh.
Well, we all know the truth, Maggie said a little defensively. Our cousin Claude hinted he might descend on them. Perhaps he and she are guarding each other's backs, which is hardly fair. She ought to bring him here for a visit, so that I can see him too.
Maggie withdrew, leaving Claire with her mother's letter and a distinct feeling of once more into the breach, dear friends. Dearest Claire, by the time you receive this, we will be nearly upon your doorstep. We leave tomorrow for London, and trust there will be room for the three of us in our old home. We are come up to town to do a little shopping, and to have dear Nicholas fitted for long pants. To think my baby is to have a tutor and begin his education. Mr. Alden Dean is a Cambridge man known to Sir Richard, so we have confidence in his ability to correctly mould our young Viscount's mind. I have some news of a most personal and happy nature, but it is not to be committed to the post. You may expect us in time for tea, as the Flying Dutchman gets into Paddington at 4:10.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?